谢谢。你好。I'm sorry that I'll be speaking in English today, and I really appreciate your taking your valuable time to come be part of this conversation today. I'll try to keep my remarks brief, mainly because Leslie Hulse will be coming next and talking to you from the perspective of a major publisher who is being very successful in distributing digital books at scale, achieving double-digit percentages of revenue from eBooks. And what she's going to talk about is very practical, very near-term, and very actionable for, I hope, you guys today and tomorrow. I'll talk a little bit more broadly about the overall landscape first, and then again you'll hear from Leslie about the practical issues of actually producing the content. So first of all, a word about the IDPF, the organization I represent. The International Digital Publishing Forum is a global trade association, a nonprofit, formed of close to 400 members from around the globe. I'm very pleased that our membership has been growing rapidly in Asia, with over 1/3 of our total members now coming from East Asia, and nearly 40 members in Taiwan alone. So if your organization is a member of IDPF, either directly or through the TDPF, the Taiwanese Digital Publishing Forum, I appreciate your support, and I hope today you'll hear from me what we are doing to advance open standards for digital publishing, because that's our mission. The IDPF's focus is to advance an open global ecosystem for digital publishing. We believe that digital publishing is for everyone, and that an open standard will help us to achieve that faster and better, and help publishers and authors thrive and make money in this transition to digital publishing. The theme of today is an evolution to digital. Sometimes it seems more like a revolution, and sometimes it seems like a revolution that is upsetting everything. And so I think that, that standards, and EPUB being the core standard developed by the IDPF, are one way to help us achieve a transition from paper being the only form of communicating the written word to consumers and readers, to digital taking its place as a major medium, that we can do that in a way that is going to help us all be successful and help authors and publishers continue to be able to get fairly compensated for creating the premium content that we as readers want to consume. Now, this talk is supposed to be about international adoption of EPUB3. I'm going to get there soon enough, but first I want to take a slight detour and talk to you about the web standards that the EPUB is based on, including HTML5. So before I even get there, though, we say digital publishing, but what do we mean? What is digital publishing? Is it just making an ebook and distributing it the way we do a paper book instead of on pallets, we distribute it through servers and the clouds? I think it's a little more general than that. I think that digital publishing means digitally distributing premium content. That includes some words, because that's the kind of publishing we do. We're not in the music business, we're not in the game business, software business. So words are part of what we do to get content out to readers. But it's not necessarily just an ebook, and that ebook is not necessarily just an analog to a paper book. And I think to peel that onion back another layer, we need to think about what is content. In the print world, we didn't have to think about this. For our whole careers in print publishing, the book has been what it is. Actually, for hundreds and hundreds of years, the print book has been what it is. So we really didn't have to think about what is content. I think in the digital world, where we're competing with music, games, software, apps for the attention of readers, the attention of consumers who have a limited and finite amount of time, we have to think more carefully about content and how we take our premium content and deliver it. I think of content as a combination of information and experience. And I think it's useful for us, as we think about what business we're in, to not be just thinking about us being in the business of manufacturing books and ebooks, even though that right now is what we do, and for years to come, with print being the majority of the business, or at least a significant amount of the business, with ebooks having to align with print, that workflow of manufacturing print and ebooks will be critically important. And again, Leslie's going to talk quite a bit about that. But I'm going to talk more broadly about the ways of delivering information and experience to readers. But why do people read anyway? What is this? What is the point of the content, whether we're talking about print or digital? I think it's important for us to remember that our books as artifacts exist for readers, and the readers want to read not because they like reading per se, they want to read to get a job done in the general sense. What does that mean exactly? Well, there's a theory about products versus jobs, and it comes originally from Theodore Levitt, a professor of marketing formerly at Harvard Business School. The idea is that people don't want to buy a quarter-inch drill. They want some quarter-inch holes. The drill as a product exists to get a job done for the consumer. That's its point. And I believe that we need to think about our content as getting jobs done for readers, not just as artifacts, in order to truly understand what the digital medium is going to afford us. By way of analogy, let me explain about newspapers, since it's not really the same business as us, but it's very close. What's the job of newspapers? What did newspapers help me do? This comes from Clayton Christensen, another professor at Harvard Business School, and author of a book called The Innovator's Dilemma, among others, that I would heartily recommend to you. He's thought about this and realized that products don't just compete with similar competitive products. They compete with a broad array of ways for people to get various jobs done. So in the case of a newspaper, we think of it as it helps you become well-informed. That's kind of the first and overt job of a newspaper. But a newspaper also may help you unwind at the end of a day. A newspaper may be something to help you kill commuting time. It may be a way to find your next car or your next job. A newspaper's job for you may be to unload stuff you don't want anymore. Now, in all of these jobs, of course, we found the newspaper to be starting to be disrupted by alternative ways of getting these jobs done. You can be well informed by just having your mobile phone giving you news updates all the way through the day. At the end of the day or during the commuting time, you may be playing Angry Birds or something like that, rather than wanting to read. And to find your next car or job, or to unload stuff you don't want anymore, you may be using services like Craigslist. So the newspaper can't really think of itself as just competing with other newspapers. In this digital world, especially, it has to think of itself as competing against a broad array of jobs people want to get done. And I believe that the more we in publishing think about those jobs, the more successful we're going to be in this digital transition. The less likely it is that other spheres of content, app developers and game developers, are going to come take away our readers' time. That ultimately is what is going to make our content less valuable and our businesses less viable. It's not about competing publisher to publisher. It's not about paper versus digital. It's about making sure that books, whether they're in print or digital, get the jobs done for readers better than the alternatives. So there's 3 levels to Clayton Christensen's point of view about the architecture of jobs in this abstract sense. The first is, what's the fundamental job or problem the consumer is facing? Again, I want to unwind at the end of the day, or I want to get a new car. The second part of it is, what are the experiences in purchase and use, which if you gave all of those to the person who wants to do that job, would sum up to really nailing that job, really satisfying that consumer. Frankly, that's what Apple and Steve Jobs excelled at thinking about and delivering. They delivered products that nailed it for consumers. And that's an important thing to think about here, that they didn't go and do market survey research to figure out what consumers wanted, but they did think about these jobs and think about how to nail the solution. Then the third part of it, and the start of where you get to how you're going to do it, is what are the product attributes, technologies, and features that are needed to deliver the experience. So you don't really start getting to how you're going to do it until you start thinking through these different levels of the job. But then once you do, I think that with regards to content, So if you're going to use content, digital content, to get a job done for people, I believe that there's essentially 3 fundamental ways to deliver content experiences: files, apps, and websites. If you think about it, for 20 years, we've been delivering content in these forms. It really hasn't changed very much. By files, I mean data in a transportable format: songs, movies, documents, and eBooks. Most of this talk today will focus on eBooks, but when we think about this, I think it's important to think more generally about these classes of content, of which eBooks is only a type of file. And some people like to debate, should we be doing eBooks? Should we be doing apps? Should we be doing websites? I think that's fundamentally an unproductive debate, because the answer is all of the above, depending on the best way to nail the job that the consumer needs to get done. It may be that for a certain job, a website is the right way. It may be for another job, an app is the right way. It may be for another job, an ebook, a downloadable file is the right way. But I think it's counterproductive to argue about should we be doing this or that, because the answer depends on the job. And I think it's also unproductive to debate sort of downloading files versus cloud-based services. Of course, cloud-based services are more and more important. And I believe that some few years from now, the cloud-based solutions will be pervasive. But that's not about how you structure the content itself. That's about how you deliver that content out to people. It's the pipeline. What flows through the pipe is that content. And thinking about how you're going to structure that, I believe, is what's critical for all of us as publishers. It's not so critical whether it's downloaded, whether it's served up through the cloud. And there's advantages in both and disadvantages to both, depending on the job the consumer's going to get done. If I'm reading on a plane, and I had long flights to get here, I don't want to be tied to a cloud solution right now. Again, maybe that will be different in 5 years. But right now, I need a downloaded file experience or an app experience, because apps and files share that attribute of being fundamentally downloadable things versus websites that are fundamentally not downloadable things. So regardless of how you're delivering files, apps, and websites, you can think of cloud and downloaded hard drive storage, so to speak. It's funny, my kids, I think, will look at that thing on the left and say, well, what is that? They're going to think of files as these little tiny things, or disk drives, as tiny things. The idea that you have rotating media and all that, it already looks a little quaint, actually. So sorry about that. So what are the options for content? Well, again, you can tell from that picture, I'm kind of old school here, and I'm going to take you a long way back. I'm going to take you 20 years back to 1993. How do we get files, apps, and websites done in 1993? Well, for files, we had Office documents. Some people may remember this thing called Macromind, eventually Macromedia Director, and Lingo and the things associated with creating these director files for multimedia presentations. That existed back then. And we just had started this brand new thing called PDF. And I was one of the people who sort of instigated this onto the world. I'm sorry about that. But it served a great purpose for electronic paper. And for apps, so that was kind of the options you had for delivering content as files in 1993. For apps, you had basically Windows and Mac. And for websites, of course, you had HTML. So the world in 1993 was, reasonably straightforward. Now, if you fast forward 4 years ahead to 1997, it's kind of interesting what happened. Well, you have the same options for files, apps, and websites. They still existed and were still very popular. You start having some additional options for apps. Linux came around, and the first mobile operating systems, Palm and Windows CE. And on the website side, you had the option to use PDF in the browser as well as a separate solution, but otherwise nothing really had changed. And then you had one more little thing in 1997, this thing called Flash. That was a way to have files, and Director still existed, but by 1997 you can say that Flash had sort of taken over that role for files, to a large degree, and was also, like PDF, available in the browser as a plugin. So that was, you might say, the landscape of content in 1997, 15 years ago almost. So what's changed since then? Oh wait, there was one more thing we had back then. we had this thing called Java. And the idea of write once, run anywhere. That you could take content and run it as an app or in a website as an applet and have that be consistent. So, okay, that's completing the picture from 15 years ago. What's changed today? Actually, almost nothing. I mean, really, this picture, what got set up in the world of browsers and plugins and files and apps back in 1997, it changed radically from 1994 to 1993 to 1997. But then in the subsequent 15 years, it's not changed so much. We have, in today's landscapes, some differences. You know, Palm and Windows CE have kind of gone away, but you've got iOS and Android. Linux hasn't gone away, but it's not really relevant as a consumer delivery option for content anymore. You've still got Mac and Windows. They have different icons and different names, but the same things. You still definitely have Office documents and PDF. You also have Flash, you might say, extending itself to files, to apps as well as websites with technologies like Flex and the evolution of the Flash runtime. Air and Flex, Adobe, Macromedia/Adobe was able to extend Flash to cover all three of those aspects. And then you've got a few other things. You've got the ability to take HTML content, again, same stuff with a new logo, and package it with solutions like PhoneGap and others to make an app out of HTML. And with EPUB, essentially you can make a file out of HTML as well. So that's, you might say, the landscape of today. And you can see that Flash is really the only thing that spans all of those options. Flash has been very powerful for some segments of publishing. Textbooks and other segments have been able to use it and leverage the fact that a consistent runtime was able to be used for files, apps, and websites. But there's some problems with that. The biggest problem was it came from a single vendor, Adobe. And that single vendor couldn't execute across all the range of platforms. And it was a monoculture. One vendor simply couldn't do everything it took to really make that platform a great, compelling platform. And it was a closed, proprietary platform. It wasn't something open. It wasn't something that anyone could play in on an equal footing. And in fact, Flash is, you might say, kind of fading away. So really, for all intents and purposes, while Flash isn't gone, it's not necessarily a realistic option, especially when iOS is going to be one of the most compelling ways that you need to deliver apps, and especially when one of the most compelling places to deliver a website is to iOS phones and tablets, which don't run Flash. So again, if Flash isn't gone, but like Linux, it's less and less a realistic option for delivering content. So that's the landscape of today. And what I'm going to talk about the rest of this talk is a part of that landscape that I think is going to be increasingly important for publishers in delivering content, which is the open web platform and how EPUB fits into it. You can say that with the open web platform, we can take HTML content for the web, and deliver it as files, apps, and websites consistently. So you've got one platform, like Flash, not controlled by any one company, and much more open, free to use, multiple implementations, where you as a publisher can choose when and how to deliver, but leveraging the same consistent set of technologies across all of that, and technologies that integrate with other technologies you're already using, like XML, in ways that Flash never did, because it was a legacy of the 1990s, you might say. So we now have the open web platform, a term that W3C is starting to use, that lets you deliver as a website, app, or ebook as it makes sense for you. There are, though, a few little wrinkles, a few problems in this picture. The open web platform is a technology stack, but it's a pretty complicated one. It's not just HTML5. HTML5 is a nice logo to put on it. But when you look inside the picture, it's a complex virtual machine with a full-scale scripting language, 7 or 8 different content formats, complex styling environment, and a complex set of APIs for accessing the sensors, for accessing data on the internet, and so on. This is not a simple environment. And the Open Web Platform, the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium that develops HTML5 and related standards, is proudly marketing that the Open Web Platform consists of over 100 specifications. And I don't know about you, but I'm kind of intimidated to say that if I'm going to deliver content, rich interactive content in this Open Web Platform as files, apps, or websites, I've got to think about all these different specs, or at least think about hiring people with the skills to think about all these specs, it's kind of scary, actually. So Flash wasn't actually that much simpler. To go back a little bit, Flash had an architecture, a little bit like this, but it was a little bit more approachable. And the fact that there was only one implementation and one major authoring tool made it easier to deal with. The open web platform is more open, but as a result, there are multiple implementations, 4 different major browser implementations, and many different kinds of tooling. And it's still rapidly evolving. The open web platform took this leap forward to HTML5 in order to compete with Flash. It did a great job. It, you might say, killed Flash, but at the same time, it didn't quite catch up to Flash's ease of use and tooling. So my contention, though, is the open web platform is the future. It may not be 100% of the way to where we need it yet, but it's the only realistic alternative that we're going to have to deliver content, files, eBooks, apps, and websites in an open, interoperable way across all platforms. The economies of scale, the reach, the avoidance of lock-in that you're going to get from the open web platform, those advantages are greater than the advantages of, say, platform polish or tailored authoring tools of developing for closed proprietary systems. So HTML5 is the answer, but it's not so easy. That's where EPUB comes in. EPUB, essentially, its job for you is to help make the web platform usable for publishers. It's a roadmap for using the open web platform to reliably deliver structured, interoperable, offline usable content. The key point is that publishers need to operate at scale. You're not making one app like Angry Birds with a team of 40 people taking 2 years. You need to get content out week by week and month by month over and over again. Again, Leslie is going to talk to you much more practically about the actual steps people are doing that for eBooks. And EPUB makes the web platform, makes HTML usable at scale for creating publications, which is fundamentally different than creating apps. And also different than creating websites, where if you get something wrong in a website, you can tweak it, you can fix it. The website is an online environment. That's its power. It's a limitation, though, when you want to get content to people who aren't online. But for publishing, you need to therefore make content that's more reliable, that you know is going to work across multiple environments, and that you may not be able to easily tweak later. So EPUB, what it does beyond HTML5 is fundamentally just 2 things. It specifies the required functionality, the profile of web standards for global language support, for accessibility, for CSS layout and fonts, and for core media types. Those are things that the web platform kind of glosses over. The web platform doesn't actually say whether you can embed fonts. It doesn't actually provide all the features necessary for vertical writing, like for traditional Chinese, which obviously is critically important here. The web platform doesn't even necessarily say whether particular image formats are going to work in a given browser. So EPUB explains and profiles all of those capabilities to give publishers a reliable roadmap for using the web standards. The second thing is it extends the web platform. It adds additional capabilities needed for portable publications, packaging, logical structure and navigation of that structure, a page order, you might say, a content order, metadata, declarative information like event bindings, the ability to reference content fragments, and synchronization of media playback with content rendering for read out loud kinds of capabilities. So these capabilities, I believe, are the things that are going to be useful to you in making your content both reliable and capable. And that's really all EPUB's job is relative to HTML. Sometimes people say, well, should we go with EPUB or just go, quote, straight to the web? But you're going to need these kind of capabilities. First of all, you need to reliably use the web. But secondly, you may need these kinds of capabilities, which is what EPUB gives you. Now, EPUB3 is a new version. It's just now being supported, and the last little bit of my talk is going to be talking to you about that support timeline. But to kind of sum up where EPUB is versus EPUB2, let me talk about that. There's really 5 ways that EPUB3 extends from the previous version, EPUB2, which has been very successful, particularly in North America and Europe. The first is styling and layout improvements for primarily reflow content, which was the design center of EPUB2, content that can adapt to different size screens, content that can look good here, look good on an iPad, etc. We have much more capabilities for styling, including mathematics markup, which is a very important feature for education. We now also have fixed layout content, both through CSS capabilities, the style sheet language of the web, and through something called scalable vector graphics, which is the same imaging model as PostScript and PDF, which is now part of the Open Web Platform and part of EPUB. So you can represent both reflow content in EPUB3 and fixed layout content. We now have interactivity and rich media through the JavaScript that's in the browser and related capabilities. We have a rich set of accessibility support so that people who have blindness or other visual disability, print disabilities can consume the content more easily. And last but not least, we have global language support. The web kind of ignored the needs of global typography. Vertical writing, I think, first came out in like Internet Explorer 4, Internet Explorer 5, but for whatever reason, the web didn't pick that up, didn't really pick up the needs of publishing. And so we've worked with the W3C to extend CSS, to push forward the parts of CSS needed for vertical writing, right-to-left page progression direction, et cetera, and get that into EPUB3 and out in the world. So that's EPUB3 versus EPUB2. And EPUB3 adoption is already starting to happen. I think there's three areas where the need for new capabilities are driving the early adoption of EPUB3. The first is fixed layout EPUB, eBooks. As I mentioned, EPUB2 didn't support fixed layout properly. So we now have fixed layout support. We have comics, manga, what we call in the US coffee table books, what they call much more pleasingly in French, beau livre, beautiful books. These are all things that really EPUB2 didn't do a good job of with its simple text format. And that's going to be a segment that if you need that kind of content, that adopting EPUB3 early makes a lot of sense. The second is enhanced ebooks. Because EPUB2 didn't support scripting, there was no real way to make the kind of engaging, interactive books that are at the boundary between ebooks and apps. Again, there may be times you want to make an app, a real app, and distribute it through app channels. But if you want something you can distribute through ebook channels and something that can gracefully degrade to run on an e-ink screen that doesn't support interactivity, EPUB provides that capabilities, and so that's where enhanced ebooks are another key area for early adoption of EPUB3. And we're also seeing very rapid adoption of EPUB3 in the Japanese market. Like Taiwan, the needs for vertical writing are serious there. Ebook adoption there perhaps was a bit ahead of Taiwan in terms of market share, and the Japanese government and publishing industry stakeholders have rapidly coalesced around EPUB3 as the standard format in Japan. And the Rakuten Kobo ebook store, for example, launched a couple months ago, only accepts EPUB3 content, which is a great step and is the beginnings of rapid market adoption of EPUB3 in Japan. So I believe that beyond those segments, even if all you have is a straight novel, and it's even for US or Europe, EPUB3 will ultimately replace the previous version. It has improvements in styling and layout that are broadly useful. Accessibility is important for all kinds of content. There's times where you have fixed layout content inside a reflowable content, and you need those features of EPUB3 even if the book is largely reflowable. EPUB3 is well aligned with the modern browser and the open web platform. And it's just a better spec. EPUB2 was based on 12-year-old web standards and was written a long time ago. We've learned things now about more tightly specifying conformance of content and reading systems. And we put that knowledge to work in creating a better specification in EPUB3. And last but not least, publishers need a single format. It doesn't make sense for publishers to start tailoring different formats to different use cases. We want a unified workflow that's going to make content production, distribution, and archival scalable and reliable. And so it's important for us to think about EPUB3 as really the successor format. I hope a year from now we're not even talking about EPUB3. It's just EPUB. And it's assumed that EPUB3 is what's meant. And I think you're going to have to think about what kind of content you produce in this EPUB3 world based on its categories. I won't go into a lot of detail here, but I think that if you think about content as either being driven by the content, not the layout, or the layout more than the content, and if you think about another axis as being whether there's structure to a content, whether it's semantically heavy or semantically light, you can think about the kind of content you want to create. If you have really simple books like fiction and essays and history books, that's going to be light in the content, light in layout, and light in semantics. You may have other kinds of books that have more structure to them, more organized structure, more semantics, but still are light in the layout. You may have things that are heavy on layout and heavy on semantics, and I think a textbook is a key example of that. It's both structured, but may have also very visually complex pages. And then you have things that are sort of beautiful books, like a comic or manga, but doesn't have necessarily so much logical structure. On the right-hand side, you're more and more going to want to create fixed layout content, fixed layout EPUB, things that you might have used PDF for, but now with EPUB you get the benefits of being able to build on web standards and have a single set of distribution workflow technology. On things on the left, reflow EPUB will give you better results, get you to more screens more easily, and make your content more accessible. But that's a decision you're going to need to make. And again, I hope a year from now we're not talking about EPUB2 versus EPUB3 or EPUB versus other formats, but we're talking about how to create the various kinds of content we need to make. But we're not quite yet where we need to be. The world isn't all sunny yet. Unfortunately, or for better or for worse, for novels and text-only linear nonfiction in North America and Europe, EPUB2, you might say, is kind of good enough. Again, we've benefits that EPUB3 can deliver: semantic enhancements, accessibility, better formatting and layout. But in the short term, any new technology version, its biggest competition is often the previous version of the same technology. And we're having that problem with EPUB2 versus EPUB3. EPUB2 will also get you to Kindles and other non-EPUB platforms better at the moment. Because EPUB2 is broadly adopted, there's a lot of workflows that can ingest EPUB2 that may not be ready for EPUB3 yet. There's more tools available, both for authoring and manipulation and so on. And there's sort of a chicken and egg syndrome. Because EPUB2 is good enough in some markets, there's less urgency for reading systems to upgrade. And that's a big effort for reading system developers. They're upgrading 12 years of web technology in one go to get to EPUB3 support. And most reading system developers today didn't use a browser engine to implement their EPUB2. In EPUB3, you really have to build on the browser, which means you might say a brain transplant, if not a rewrite, for reading systems. So, as well, we have Flash, PDF, and native mobile tablet apps that are still options for publishers. I believe that the open web platform using HTML5 for eBooks, for apps, for websites, is a compelling answer for your technology strategy. But in the short term, you've got a variety of options that you may have already invested in, and they may be competing for you in terms of time and attention as you think about how you're going to get your content out. So we're not quite there yet. And worst of all, in my view, in some sense, is that there's other options that are proclaiming themselves to be HTML5 based. iBooks Author from Apple, Amazon Kindle's KF8 format, Inkling Habitat are just 3 examples of things that are marketing themselves as also being based on HTML5, that are, you might say, competing for your time and attention as well as the other options. If you take away nothing else from my talk today, I hope you take away the idea that when a vendor comes to you and says, we're HTML5 based, you should be worried and start asking questions. In my view, it's the most deceptive 3 words you can hear from a proprietary platform vendor. If they say, we're proprietary, we build apps, and the apps work here and there, and it's based on our own technology, at least they're being honest with you. But when they tell you they're HTML5 based, they're kind of trying to convince you that you're gonna be able to get some portability. Now there's a fine line because you have to innovate. Tools like iBooks Author are delivering a level of polish and integration for an authoring experience, for example, that goes beyond what other authoring tools have done so far, including with EPUB. But there's a balance between innovating and privatizing. In my view, being a privatizer, trying to get content locked in, even though you're building on technologies like HTML, it doesn't make sense. If you're going to invest in an HTML-based solution, why invest in one that locks you into one vendor's hardware and software platform? I think that that's something that you're going to have to think through very carefully as you think about what solutions you want to use. The vendors of proprietary solutions are seeking the cachet of openness, and they're seeking the transfer of skill sets, but they're not actually trying to be open or interoperable. They're trying to kind of have it both ways. But what they really want to do is not be a niche, and that's something that hasn't happened yet. In the app space, those folks who forked web standards to create different solutions have generally failed or become niches. Adobe Flex and Air being one of the several examples of that. So what they want to do is create lock-in. These vendors want to have platforms that you can get in, but you and your content can't get out. And I believe that that's something that you're going to need to avoid. And I think we can make an analogy of what's happening by looking at the app space. By talking about iBooks Author and Inkling Habitat and Amazon Kindle KF8, that's talking about ebooks. But let's talk about apps for just a minute. The open web platform is actually still pretty messy. There's a bunch of different widget solutions. There's no standard. The W3C tried to make a standard, but it failed, due in part to one of these vendors raising patent issues. For full-scale web applications, there's a variety of ways to do it with no standard yet. Windows 8 is coming out in another 10 days. That's going to be yet another way to use HTML5 technology to build apps. But it's not a standard. There is no standard yet for building full-scale apps out of web technology. And there's a variety of ways you can wrap a native app around web platforms. In a way, that's the best option right now because usually those run in browser engines and don't sort of lock you in relative to that web content. But there's a variety of different tools, and again, there's no real standard among those tools. The good news is the World Wide Web Consortium has just chartered a systems application group, co-led by Google and Samsung. So there's some hope that this space will get cleaned up. But right now, if you're trying to develop an app and you'd like to develop it based on web standards, there's really no clear way to go. And there's some more headaches. The web view performance in iOS for iPad and iPhone is severely disadvantaged versus Apple's own solutions. Apple runs their own solutions like iBooks with more performance and more features and cripple third parties building in the UI web view and using tools like PhoneGap. The support for the open web platform differs significantly platform by platform, and hardware acceleration levels differ platform by platform. That means you can't be sure if you use a technology like SVG, is it going to work fast here, there, or somewhere else? And it probably won't. There's patent issues, and there's also, you might say, browser vendor foot dragging. It killed the W3C widgets, and there's sort of a fundamental conflict of interest. The browser vendors, Apple and Google, are also the mobile platform vendors, iOS and Android. So while they want to compete to make the platform better for the web, they're also competing with themselves, being mobile app providers, which leads to this conflict of interest. Microsoft now among them as well. And the tools and frameworks are far less mature. They're less mature than native app development. They're less mature than Flash development, especially tools targeted at designers. So that means that the web platform for apps, frankly, it's a mess. The good news is there is competition, there is pressure from across the IT industry, not just from publishing, but from all spheres of development of apps and content that's working on this situation. I believe this situation will rapidly improve and that standardization will come. But when we start thinking that things are kind of still a bit ugly in ebook land, so to speak, which they are as we transition from EPUB 2 to EPUB 3, and as we still have differences among reading systems, I guess by comparison, my argument is it's even worse for apps. So we have a hope here, and we have a growing industry support around EPUB 3 as the future. So we have EPUB already being supported by iBooks, by Kobo, by Google Play Books. We have tools like InDesign that are already building on EPUB. We have open source options like the Reading Project from IDPF, and a variety of other vendors, ranging from accessibility vendors like Bookshare to vendors in Asia like Voyager Japan, all now rolling out EPUB 3 solution. This list will be twice as long 2 months from now. So we're at a time of rapid coalescing around EPUB 3 as the open web platform for digital publications. So while, again, it's not a great, perfect solution yet, momentum is here, and I think with your help here in Taiwan, we can advance this platform sooner. So the IDPF focus for the next year is really to deliver on the promise of EPUB 3 as portable documents for the open web platforms. We're focusing on best practices documentation, samples, training, evangelism, tools for validating content, for pre-flighting content, a test suite for reading systems that we're going to be making a call for participation around within just a few days, and an open source implementation called Redium. That's an open source implementation of all of EPUB3. That's something that you can use in your own solutions as well as use as a test bed. We have now 2 different folks who are shipping commercial solutions based on Redium. And of course, continuing to evolve EPUB. We are not stopping at EPUB3. EPUB, as the portable document packaging of open web, needs to define all of the features that you need to make things work. And we have additional work underway within the IDPF to do that. And collaboration with other stakeholders. The IDPF doesn't exist in a vacuum. EPUB exists as part of the open web platform, so collaboration with the W3C is increasingly important. And I'm delighted to be able to say to you today that the W3C, IDPF, and the Book Industry Study Group and other standards group will be working together to hold a joint workshop, a joint technical workshop on digital publications and the open web platform in February in New York City. So I'm very excited about that, and the formal announcement will be coming out very soon. We're also collaborating with other groups, including, for example, IMS Global Learning, the group that standardizes e-learning formats like Common Cartridge, and working to align and integrate our technology standards there. The government of Korea is quickly adopting EPUB3 as the standard solution for digital textbooks, and has kind of pushed IMS and IDPF to kind of get our act together and collaborate. And after this event, I'm going on to Seoul, where we're going to be working on that during next week. And last but not least, during the coming year, we will take the first steps towards making EPUB3 a de jure ISO-level international standard. So IDPF will continue to push EPUB forward, but for EPUB 3.0, actually it'll probably be EPUB 3.01, a maintenance release. We're going to make that an international standard technical specification during the coming year. So while the situation isn't perfect yet, we haven't achieved this beautiful, seamless world where designers can create content and make it for apps, for websites, for eBooks. It's not a beautiful world yet. We're really getting there. And I want to close with some thoughts about this fundamental tension, the tension between seamless integration and open standards and modular architectures. I finally got around to reading Steve Jobs, a great book. How many of you have read this book? A lot of you. It was painful to me because the only product that I ever got to pitch Steve when I was at Adobe, he hated, and I knew he was going to hate it. So because it was, it wasn't close enough for him. But he did adopt PostScript very much and adopt PDF. So we did have successes working with him. Steve wasn't against all standards. He preferred closed when he could get to it. But one of his last announcements was announcing the iPad, where he got up on stage and announced iBooks and said it was supporting EPUB, which I was pleased and actually surprised about. So Steve was a complicated guy. But one of the key points the book made was how important creativity is, combining art and technology. And I really believe that that's true. I believe that that's what we need to do as publishers. We don't need to just digitize print and shoot it out as ebooks. We need to think about that union between art and technology and what's enabled by digital technology. But in the case of books, I firmly believe that what matters is the content, not the device or the software I happen to be using. In the book, Walter Isaacson quoted Jonathan Zittrain, who wrote that the PC revolution invited innovation by others, and that was critical to both the PC revolution and the internet revolution, that it was an open platform, that it was generative, that anyone who followed the rules could build PC apps, anybody who followed the rules could build websites. That caused those things to overcome the entrenched winners. The Apple had much more market share than the PC. CompuServe and AOL had dominant market share in online services, but the scale provided by an open modular architecture that was available to all trumped. The flip side is the possibility that closed proprietary architectures can dam up that open ocean of innovation into closed little ponds where all the profits go to the platform maker. Zittrain called that sterile appliances of control. And I don't think we want publishing to be controlled by sterile appliances dominated by specific vendors. I don't think we want the concept of a digital book to be a Kindle book or an iBook. We don't want the world to look like this instead of a blue ocean of possibilities that we can go after as publishers and authors of content. These little ponds where the profits get sucked out and carted off by the vendors, and we're locked in to these stagnant waters. I think the vendors that are creating proprietary solutions, especially the ones that claim to be based on HTML, but actually are dammed off and walled off, are doing that to create private ponds where they can extract the value, but I just believe that fundamentally, we can't let that happen. The good news is I think we're not going to have it happen. And quite accidentally, this wasn't on purpose, I found myself reading the Steve Jobs book on a Samsung Galaxy S3. And as I was reading it, walking along, I was thinking, Steve would have hated that. He would have just wanted to rip that out of my hand and, throw it in the river. But at the same time, it didn't matter to me. While I'm reading the book, I don't care if the Samsung Galaxy S3 or the Asus Google Nexus 7 is more or less elegant. The content is what mattered. It was a compelling book. As we add rich media, interactivity, audio, video, as we make these books of the future, I think it's the content that's going to matter. Of course, devices matter too. People can compete based on better devices. People can compete based on better software. But I believe that it's the content that's king, and that whether you're building websites, apps, or ebooks, I hope that EPUB, as a roadmap for using the open web platform to deliver your content, will help you get there and help you make it happen. Thanks for the help so far, and I look forward to a very interesting few years as we go out and tackle this blue ocean of possibilities for digital content getting everywhere. 谢谢.
Well, that's very informative. 各位不知道有没有任何的问题要想问的？实际上，这整个听下来好多新的名词哦。EPUB 2.0，那以前听过 ，EPUB 3.0，HTML5，一堆新的名词。但是总而言之，大家要想一下内容是什么？因为以前联合线上一直在讲，内容如水。你既然做了内容，你就是要让所有的人。不管用任何的硬件或者纸张也只是一个媒介，可以阅读你的内容。那要有办法做到这个，实际上就需要规格化、标准的规格。实际上，标准的规格就是我们所谓的科技业为什么台湾可以从1980年代经过30年有办法这样子一直在成长，也就是因为标准的规格可以让我们量产。那 EPUB 2.0 其实大家很简单一个想法，它就像 USB 2.0 或蓝牙 2.1。那现在技术升级了到 EPUB 3.0，就像 USB 2.0 到 3.0， 蓝牙 2.1 到 3.0， 就这么简单。所以说这整个进展，大家说，那要怎么做呢？实际上我们在下午的场次开始有不同的厂家会来分享他们怎么去做一些转换。那另外在我们休息之前，不知道有没有其他的问题想要问的？那如果没有的话，我们大概休息10分钟。外面有咖啡跟饮料，大概11点16分，我们到时候就开始听 Leslie 这边来帮我们讲解他们的出版社怎么从传统转到数位这边来，然后转得非常非常的成功。好，那我们另外一场11点16分见。